Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of On Authentic Leadership. I am one of your hosts, Matt Smith, joined by Cam Ellsworth, aka the Colonel and the Coach. And we are joined by two very special guests today. The prior 552 Air Control Wing Commander, Colonel Ken Voigt, and during his tenure, the 552 Operations Group Commander, Colonel Snooch Zemler. So, gentlemen, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on board.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Having you guys on, one of the things Cam and I talked about is just an opportunity for folks who, your guys' case did really well in command, is an opportunity for you guys to just talk about, really whatever you guys want to talk about in the role that you guys, served. And obviously, both the 552 Air Control Wing and the 552 Ops Group are really large organizations with a lot of airmen with obviously an exceptionally important mission, especially just in today's Air Force and today's joint operational environment. There's not a lot of those capabilities that exist, and you guys represented, not just the best of what we had from a platform perspective, but the best of what we had from an airman perspective. And so, just over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, we'd just like to have a conversation with you guys and give you guys an opportunity to kind of talk about some successes that you guys may have had, maybe some lessons identified, things that you missed. And I know, so for the folks who don't know, Colonel Zemler is now Colonel Jason Snooch Zemler, retired. He's now living in Florida, enjoying the good life with his family, and so just an opportunity for you guys, if you guys were to go back again, or to share some lessons identified with folks that are interested in being squadron commanders, operations group commander, group wing commanders, and serving at that next level. What you would say to the Captain Voice, what you would say to the Lieutenant Zemlers, what would you say to those folks, and then also just from a personal perspective, if you guys could kind of just, not necessarily just right now, but we'd like to just talk about the work-life balance. I mean, Cam and I always talk about this. The pace of life today is blistering. Everyone has some place that they need to be, some place that they have to go to and whatnot. And I think, sometimes you get caught up in that, and a 40-hour week in the Air Force doesn't really happen. It's more like a 50, 60, 70-hour week. And so we just like to, talk about, the family aspect of things, because we know, your spouses are exceptional and your families are just, special human beings. And we just would like to have that conversation as well. So, Cam, over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And the only thing I would add is I believe that one of the things that I've learned from Colonel Smith is just how applicable leadership is across many valleys, peaks, different walks of life. So while I'm sure you're speaking to a specific captain at a specific point, I think there's going to be a lot of people out there that could take those lessons and learn. Ken, you're up first. If you could just maybe talk a little bit about how you got to that position, maybe just a quick synopsis of your military career that led you to be the wing commander.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thanks for that. It's great to go first. Snooch, you're welcome. I would say the only way I got to where I am today is because throughout my 26 years in the Air Force, I had a lot of leaders that took the time to make sure that I wasn't an idiot. When I graduated Norwich, I came out a second lieutenant, and I believed the only things you really needed was a lot of preparation and perspiration. So as long as I was an expert at what I needed to do and I just put the time in, then everything would come. While that probably gets you the 80% solution most of the time, it probably also makes you a terrible leader. And I had a lot of great mentors that were able to point out the fact that it's not just about being really good at your job. It's not just about being the expert in a room and always being right. In fact, sometimes being right's not the most important thing. Sometimes the relationship's the most important thing. I had a mentor when I was a younger lieutenant captain that took me in a room and basically told me to stop being a jerk. He didn't use the term jerk, but I'm going to say jerk here to keep it as an adult, a family-friendly podcast. But if I didn't get that real blunt, like, hey, what you're doing right now is not going to help you be the person that you need to be, I wouldn't be where I am today. And I had a lot of mentors, one of them on this podcast, that really took the time to make sure that I grew in my leadership job. And where I started with, hey, it's just going to be about my preparation and my perspiration, it grew into, I also need to have patience and perspective. And I think that when you take that individual that knows what they're doing, but then give them the ability to understand other people's perspectives and grow them into someone that's a patient. You go from that person that's a doer to a person that's a leader. And I personally am an action oriented individual that has almost zero patience. I'm a New Yorker from growing up, so I think I have negative patience. So it takes me time to actually remind myself and hear the voices of my mentors say, hey, take a deep breath, count to 10. Remember that not everybody had the same mentors that I had, and that I have to turn into that mentor and actually teach them and have the patience to bring them along so that they grow. And then be able to look at things and other people's perspectives, because not everyone has the same priorities at the same time, and not everyone's coming at the problem from the same lens. Like I would say, Captain Voigt, if he was getting something that was late from somebody or wasn't perfect, would have probably exploded on him. Like, "Hey, why is this late?" And probably would have made it personal. Colonel Voigt will look at it, goes, there's probably some reasons. Either I didn't communicate the task properly, maybe the individual didn't understand it, maybe the individual wasn't trained on how to respond, or maybe there's something going on in the individual's life that I don't understand. And take that time to kind of figure out what's going on so that one, I can help grow that individual, and two, not always be the jerk. So I would say the thing that got me here really is mentorship, and having people that took the time to get me to where I needed to be.
Well, thank you. That was extremely well said. Thank you very much.
So I'm supposed to follow that, Cam? Is that what you're saying?
That's the rules, man.
See that. As always, I let my prestigious previous boss go before me. So thanks, Cam and Smitty. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. That's an interesting question, because I think when you look back on your career, and I'm fortunate to be in the position to look back now that it's over, you kind of do wonder, hey, what did get me there? Why was I successful? And I think Det obviously nailed it from a perspective. You need individuals around you to pull you along. I do disagree slightly with one small part, and I know Det will love that I always do that, but the Air Force is kind of a roller coaster, right? You have different periods where you're meant to do different things. And the early part of my career, I think, I was fortunate enough to just have the drive and motivation to know I wanted to be in the Air Force. So I was going to do as well as I could in the Air Force. There was negatives with that too. It meant that as I went through college, I did not do as well as I should have through college, because I was just trying to achieve a means to an end and then get in the Air Force. But then I was able to run very fast when I got in the Air Force. And when you're a young guy in the Air Force, it's interesting. You're always looking at ways that you can get ahead and ways that you can kind of succeed. And people, the elders above you, just say, just do good, man. And you don't believe it. And now as I sit here today and I'm a little bit older, like, that advice was spot on. Just do good at what you're doing, the best that you can. And I was fortunate along the way that earlier in my career, I was doing well. And then those like Smitty, and I'll name drop some individuals because they're important to my life, Pooch, Conine, Big Dog Roan, those individuals kind of spotted that and took an individual that was probably all over the place, but had some glimmers of, talent, and shaped that and molded that and gave me opportunities. And I think what was most important to me as I kind of grew up and started mentoring other individuals is, you always hear the luck and timing, and there's some aspect of that, but you just have to be good at what you're doing in order to get to that luck and timing opportunity that someone's going to get you to. For me, I'll echo 100% of Det's comments. I got to where I got to just because I was doing well initially, I think. And then I was fortunate enough to have individuals recognize that, take me under their wing, correct me when I needed it, quite frankly, and kind of move forward. And then the last thing that I would say is, it does take two parts of that. So we like to be in the Air Force, we like to be negative against ourselves quite a bit, right? And we go, oh, it's everybody else's credit. I think you got to give yourself a little bit of credit sometime too. And while I think I initially fought some of that mentorship, because mentorship is hard for the mentee sometimes, eventually I started to embrace it from those individuals, and I'm really appreciative that they provided me that opportunity and that time along the way. So that's what I would say.
That was really good. I just wanted to change gears, just for a second. And I've been following just from a social media perspective and your guys' exploits just from an operational perspective, Snooch. And, what I notice is you guys give a lot of props to the enlisted corps. And I think that, even though we haven't not had as many enlisted folk on this podcast, our goal is to get to the point where we hear things from their perspective. And I think that all four of us recognize the work ethic piece. All four of us recognize the technical expertise piece, Snooch, that you talked about and whatnot. But I would just like to get your guys' perspective on just what the enlisted corps means to you, meant to you in your roles, meant to you in the Air Force, what it means to you now, and whatnot. Because, I think that, to draw on what you guys just said, I think Second Lieutenant Smith at Hill Air Force Base, back in the 90s, probably never even made it to captain had there not been some very challenging senior NCOs that pulled me aside and said, ALT, you're probably pretty smart, but like the way in which you're going about things, you probably won't make it beyond captain. And so there was mentorship from that perspective. And probably the way in which they did it wasn't necessarily, I don't know, a little bit different, but for all three of us, having spent time just on the ground as well as in the air, I think that's sometimes an experience which helped shaped us as leaders and allowed us to be, more holistic in our approach and less of, just operationally driven and knowing that there's folks behind the scene that we may never see, but yet they're responsible for our operational success and responsible for our success as leaders. And so I'll start with Snooch this time. Snooch, you spent, I don't know, like probably half and half, right? On the ground, in the air, that type of thing. And then also time in other locations of which probably each and every day you had the opportunity to work with enlisted airmen and whatnot, whether it's your time at Spang, your time at Aviano, Nellis, or downrange, or just through, some of the personal relationships you had as a result of the professional relationships you had, if you could kind of talk to that, I think some of our listeners would want to hear that.
Thanks. First, I'll be transparent. I was fortunate to be raised by an enlisted dad. So he was a chief master sergeant. He will tell you the chief outranks the colonel every day of the week, and he still continues to tell me that today after he just left town and visited. But you're hinting around what I think Dad would say, I would say, and most others would say. The enlisted corps is the backbone of the Air Force, and we say that, but I don't know if people really understand what that means. I'll tell you what it means to me. What it means to me is I was fortunate to be raised and mentored by Enlisted as a young CGO, and we could say raised and mentored. And how do you translate that? You translate that into when they recognize with their years of experience you doing the wrong things, doing exactly what you just alluded to, Smitty, pulling you off to the side and saying, "Hey, maybe that's not the way you should approach that." And usually in a humble enough manner that they accept their role. It's not threatening. So it's a humble enough manner to teach and guide and mentor you.
Right.
The story that comes to mind for me that's very personal to me is, as a captain at Eglin, I was on my second deployment to Balad Air Base, Iraq. You remember those time frames very well, Smitty.
Yep.
My chief was a Chief Jaffo Kubik, and he is one of the best chiefs that I've had the pleasure of working with throughout my career. And, he was the operations superintendent, and I was a Spitfire weapons officer that went raging around the squadron critiquing everybody, but, knew in my heart I was right and I was going to tell everybody I was right. And he approached me and kind of mentored me and guided me along the way. And so much so that even when we got in the most difficult situations, he'd pull me off to the side and talk to me, and never in a condescending way, but in a growing leadership way. And the thing that's touching to me is this chief took the time while I was deploying. This still means a lot to my dad today. This goes into mentorship and coaching and everything else. He took the time while we were 4 months through the deployment in Iraq to write a personal letter to my dad. He had gotten my dad's address and sent him a letter saying how proud he was of me, and what that meant to him. And like that has stuck with me for years on how they kind of grow that.
That's awesome.
And so I was raised by them. Where it translated to my leadership later as a squadron commander, I'll tell you the good and the bad. And I saw both good and bad chiefs as a squadron commander. And unfortunately, I had to work through some bad ones to get to some good ones. And it was a world of difference on how that affected the squadron once we changed that personality and that role. And I was fortunate to watch that happen. And that resonated to me to really understand the impact of what a good leader was in the enlisted corps and what a bad leader was. And that individual's name was Joseph Hodgson, and I call those names out because they're important figures to me. And, when you saw what a good leader could do with a squadron of 300 to 350 airmen, it was amazing to watch the turnaround on the comfort factor of just somebody who was in a leadership position that they felt they could come talk to and kind of be an ear that was not threatening, that was guiding, but was transparent and honest with them. So Really, I was raised by the enlisted corps. I think they're important. I think they're the backbone of the squadron. I don't think they get enough credit, which is interesting. But at the same point, fortunate to be surrounded by them, throughout the career in a positive manner, not necessarily a negative.
That before I hand it off to you, just, as you were talking, Snooch, just there's a lot of ranks that I think are just critical from an enlisted perspective. But if I had a favorite rank, it would probably be the E6 Tech Sergeant from an Air Force perspective. Just somebody, guy or gal that had the ability to take sort of strategic intent, to translate that into the technical expertise required to conduct the mission. And I just can't tell you how many times as a commander where I was just, not to say that I wouldn't discount what other people would say, but just sometimes when it came from, a tech sergeant, you're just like, wow, like that person is just possesses an unbelievable amount of skill. And, not to say that I wouldn't be excited for them to make that senior NCO rank, but just certainly from, and I would say that's probably across the entire Joint Force, that E6 rank is probably the sort of the centerpiece of the backbone, if you will. And again, we need those strategic enlisted leaders. We need the airmen to do the job. But I think just that sort of that center cog, just from an E6 perspective, and just interested in your thoughts on that, Snooch.
Yeah, sure. I think you're spot on. I wouldn't disagree at all. I think we're pushing that lower. I'll be
Yeah,
honest with you, from our
right.
time. Like, I didn't s- where I saw that in tech sergeants earlier in our career. I see it in staff sergeants and
Staff
senior airmen
sergeants,
now.
yeah.
And I think the interesting part, right? You can read a lot of studies on Gen
Sure.
Zs and whatever gen you're going to call it.
Yep.
They haven't changed. They're just
Sure.
as hardworking as any other predecessor. I think we are, and whether it's in the military, I think it's probably outside of the military as well. We're relying a lot on the younger ages to lead at those levels, and not
Right.
only lead but be doers, right, and be
Exactly.
experts in what they're
Yep.
doing. So
Yep.
I would agree 100%. I think we had our Det will talk to this. I'm sure we have our challenges in the 552 that you mentioned, because they just don't exist. There's
Right.
not a plethora of them. So what
Right.
we found from a more recent version was where we looked around when we started at Tinker Air Force Base with, a lot of E3s flying off. There was a large amount of senior NCOs. By the time me and Det were leaving, you couldn't find NCOs. Definitely senior NCOs were a challenge. NCOs were a challenge. So you're relying on a 21-year-old senior airman to do some of the things in that airplane that we previously used to look towards a 35 to 40-year-old master sergeant.
Right.
So I'd say we're pushing that down to a lot lower levels, and it's still impressive to see that workload that those individuals carry.
Thanks, Snooch. Great.
I couldn't agree more with you two gentlemen. Our enlisted corps is amazing. There are a lot of personal NCOs that are part of that mentoring block that got me to where I am. Whether from the flight command all the way up to wing command, I would not have survived my wing command without my command chief. It was my absolute rock, and I could bounce any idea off of him, and he had a way of looking at things a little differently than I did, and definitely had ways of letting me know when I may or may not be going astray. But I had that throughout my entire career. And I would say that's probably the best part about our enlisted corps is they do provide the officers with a different perspective. They are our youngest part. When I would talk to our junior airmen, their first term airmen, so here your 18-year-old individuals fresh out of tech school coming into the wing for the first time. And start telling them hey, why I joined the Air Force. And I'm saying things like Cold War and peace dividend and 9/11. Most of these young men and young women joined the Air Force after COVID and actually went through high school after COVID. So to them, I'm talking about stuff that was in the history books, not stuff that they lived through. So their perspective is different. They joined the Air Force for different reasons. They come from different backgrounds. They come from different ways of growing up and seeing life, and it's amazing to be able to talk to them and find out, hey, what really motivates them, and then see and watch them go. I would agree with Snooch, and the younger, we're putting a lot of leadership burdens, if you will, on some really young airmen to make sure that they can do what they need to do. We have to do that in the military today because we have to be able to disaggregate our force and be able to lead at the lowest levels. It's a training apparatus that we need to make sure we teach them the skills they need, and it is absolutely amazing to watch. I think The Air Force I joined, where it was master sergeants and majors that were your leaders, is not the Air Force of today. It's lieutenants and staff sergeants are really the go-to leaders that we're like, okay, I need you to go take commander's intent and execute. And to see them do it is just amazing. And then to be able to watch, I'd agree with you on that tech sergeant. It's probably a senior staff sergeant, junior tech sergeant today. Their language is probably not the most polished. However, their perspective, their attitude, and what they bring to the fight is that's what's going to make us win as a nation and as an Air Force. And I think it's their ability to take what senior individuals say, I need to get X, Y, or Z done, and then for them to be able to translate that to an 18-year-old, and then you don't have to close control it. You can just watch the magic happen. I would say personally for me, my worst days in command were always turned around by just walking around and seeing our airmen.
Yep.
If I got out of the office, and no matter what happened, if I got a talking down or a dressing down from my leadership, and I'm like, well, today's a bad day, I would just go out to the flight line and watch our maintainers turn big sexy into the air and go, man, this is the best it gets. Like right here, watching these men and women do their job and be just technical experts and get after the mission. It just puts a smile on your face.
Hey, can I pile on one more time on that, Smitty?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, here's one other thing I would say, and I think you alluded to it, Det, it's the enlisted corps in the Air Force is amazing. And I'm only speaking of the Air Force because that's what I know. But the differences in demographic and backgrounds and who they are was always surprising to me. I think for us, you don't realize what it's like to be having this cohort of 18 to 22-year-old kids come from varying backgrounds. And while not all are polished, I was amazed at the effort from each and every one of them. And not only that, but the reality that those individuals have chosen to sign their name to a dotted line now, where that's not necessarily as common, and
Right.
move forward with some of the things they're doing. The interesting part to me as I grew a little bit older, a little bit more senior, is I think we tend to have a perspective of those being younger than us being naive or dumb or, not well spoken or not well intentioned. They are, but they're very young and they're kids. And sometimes when you point them in the right direction, man, it was amazing to watch them go. I'll just be honest with you. It was pretty amazing to watch him go. Being a squadron commander at Aviano and watching 18 to 21-year-old kids at the firsthand level kind of succeed and the light bulb click on them and then watch them go was pretty rewarding and amazing and probably something that I'll remember for a while. So the demographics and backgrounds, though, is pretty eye-opening to me to watch kind of the differences from that cohort of individuals.
The one thing I will say though is just knowing you two guys as leaders, and it's the thing that Cam and I try to emphasize, and it's really our tagline is just empowering authentic leadership. And I think back to Snooch's point about giving your guys self enough credit, I think that just the maturity that you guys have and your guys' ability to have grown, whether it was 1% every day or whether some days there was, multiple percentage, points of greatness that you guys increased, as leaders. I think, just speaking to your guys' most recent assignment as a wing commander, group commander, and just feedback that I've received and unsolicited, I think you guys both empowered people to be themselves and you empowered them to do the job that you guys asked them to do under not so awesome situations, in the sense that we don't have a ton of aircraft. We don't have all the 7 levels and 9 levels we need. We don't have all the folks with multiple combat deployments and all that sort of stuff, because all that stuff doesn't exist. It doesn't exist like it did 15 years ago and stuff like that. So, one of the things that Cam and I try to do is just bring some positivity. And I think that, the success that you guys had and the mark that you guys left and the legacy that you guys left on the wing and on the group and on its airmen, not just within the ops group, but within the maintenance group and the support elements and stuff like that. I don't think that can be understated. And I think that I would be remiss if I did not mention that on this podcast. And I think that I just want to say thanks for your guys' leadership, and not necessarily in a throwaway thank you sort of way, but in a way in which is, I think, an incredible legacy. And I don't think everyone can say that when they look back on their time that they spent in a senior leader role. And I think both of you guys left your mark, and I just appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Smitty.
Yep.
Thank you.
If I could pull at that just a little bit again, I come at this from, Matt and I marriage as a business and as friendship. I mean, it is a little bit unique. Coming from, I grew up in Canada and didn't have both of my grandparents grandfather served in World War II, but it was not that same, um, I don't know, machine of getting, signing up to serve your country. It just wasn't the same. And I have relatives that still to this day serve. So, but what I would say is, going through is more of the idea of the military was more Full Metal Jacket. It was yell scream. It was, do this, do that, and if you get out of line, you get the soap in the bed sheet, you get hit with it, right? Like, so for you guys, and then for me to meet Matt and to learn about the time, the energy, the humility, the the empowerment has been really eye-opening for me, and it's been really cool to be able to share that with others. We did that with my team. We're doing that in our business. But if you could speak to, again, maybe it's a little bit of pulling on the first question of how you got there, but you start talking about giving commanders intent and then letting them translate and watch it go. The amount of humility, the amount of trust that is needed to allow someone, right, to translate. And at first, to even see that needs to happen. And I saw it in my world. And we would do it, bringing in guys as translators, and they would be their peers, because I feel like I was saying 1 + 1 = 2. And the person I was talking to, that didn't always get to them. And so we would bring in like translators. And so just, again, maybe that was part of your mentorship, but to get to that leadership role to where you're a commander, and then to trust and have humility to be like, this is what I know needs to happen. And I'm going to like let that cascade and trust that, we're going to get that done. And then the joy of being able to walk around, Ken, you said some of your best days. Again, could you speak to how you got to that point? Because again, in my world, it would be like the person to get to that top would have all the answers, right? So the ability for you to kind of let go of that, I think, is fascinating.
Hey, Snooch, you don't mind? I'll start. I think the realization that just because you're in the top position doesn't mean you have all the answers is probably the most important realization you need to have. Like, just because you're in charge doesn't mean that you know everything. But there is a level of confidence that you need to have in your ability. So go back, like, just both Snooch and I were instructors for a very long time, and being taught how to be an instructor. You're really putting your life in your students' hands. And for us, we're putting the lives of the aircraft that are under our control in our students' hands. And you have to know when that student needs to make mistakes, learn from their mistakes, and then correct themselves in order to get better. But there's a fine line where, like, now I have to intervene. Like, you made too many mistakes and I got to fix this. And it's an art form, and you learn it just through experience. You learn, like, where are you comfortable, where you're not comfortable, and it translates to the same as in leadership. So where are you confident in your abilities that I can let this go very far, and then I'd be able to glove save this, to use a hockey reference, right at the end. Or, hey, I'm not very confident in this. And what I have found just in watching leaders of all aspects that succeed and fail is the more confident you are in something, the less of a micromanager you are. There seems to be an inverse relationship between confidence and micromanagement. And if you're not confident in something, you tend to want to control it, because you're not, you want to be it's not on my watch. I don't know what I'm doing right now, and I'm going to get in control. And I found the best way to help me with that, because I'm not all knowing, is I build a great team. And as long as I have people on my team that are not yes people and are comfortable with telling me when I did something wrong, whether that be, hey, you're in our chili too much, I need you to back out, or you handled the way you communicated your intent to that officer or NCO was the absolute wrong way to do it, and I need you to go and apologize. I had a decom deputy commander when in the wing that came in one day, closed the door, and he said, the next thing you're going to do is open this door and go down the hallway and apologize to your chief of staff, because the way you handled the last meeting was the absolute wrong way to do it, and you're going to lose that officer. Now, to have the ability to have someone in my team that's able to do that is the reason why I could say I'm going to give my intent, and I'm going to look for the feedback, and have a good inner circle that said Snooch is part of my inner circle in the last command, and he would come to me and say, you're confusing what you just said. The team doesn't understand, so you need to help me help you, or you need to rephrase it. That right there is how you build success. You get a great team and you realize that you don't know everything, and you listen to your teammates to move forward. I don't know, Snooch, anything to add on that one?
No, the only thing that I'd add is Kim, you're hitting on something, and I would say like I'm a very transparent guy, and those that have been around me this last couple of years know it's more so. I'm uncomfortable with it. I would definitely allow mission command pushing guidance down and let the team run with it, but it's not a comfortable feeling. You don't walk out and go, they're gonna shack it. This is great. I usually left the room going, but what I got from it that was very satisfying is sometimes the answers that would come up were way better than I would have ever thought. And the ingenuity and the innovation that would come back at me was great. And I would have my team. I was fortunate enough at my last job to just have a really great team around me. They would come up to me and they would tell me, "Hey sir, like we know you were uncomfortable in that meeting and you at the head of the table, why didn't you speak up?" And I said, "Because if this fails, it's okay. This is one of those things. If this fails, that squadron commander, that squadron chief, that individual is going to learn so much more from this failure than they're ever going to learn by me just correcting them and the path that they're going down." And to Det's point, like you have to evaluate, is this one that I can let fail from a learning perspective, or is this one that I need to jump in and correct? But I mean, really, to your point, Cam, me personally, if I was to tell you, oh, it's easy, it's not. I walk out half the time, and what I learned as I got older is just shut up. You might not have to say anything right now. Just shut up, let it play out. And if it was really something, I think to the point that I was alluding, like I had a great team around me. If I was uncomfortable, I wouldn't necessarily say it at that point in time with some of the guidance that I pushed down or what was coming back to me. I'd wait until after. I would talk to those that are closest to me and I'd go, "Hey, here's my thoughts. Am I off base? Am I crazy? Should I change that, or are we doing okay?" And I really had to rely on a lot of those around me because just like Det's alluding to, I have a ton of smart people around me. So we'll get their feedback and kind of go from there. But to the directness of your question, it was uncomfortable for me just allowing that sometimes.
Before we move on, some of the feedback I received, Snooch, and one of the things I don't even know if you knew that you did this, but you did it so well, is if you're holding whatever, a staff meeting, a stand up, something that required not just you speaking, but like a dialogue and a discussion, is you would sort of from a Socratic method perspective, ask the questions and legitimately say, I don't know the answer to this. And I think all of us need to come up with this answer, collectively together. And I can just, you probably received this feedback in the past, but I've received this feedback on you just over the past few months, is that was a great TTP, tactic, technique, and procedure that you utilized, because they recognize that you weren't all knowing, right? I mean, I've known that for years, but no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, and I think it put people at ease, because it was like, wow, like there was just that little subtle gesture was just a way of you not saying like, I'm the know-it-all. Like everyone knew that you were the squadron commander. Everybody knew that you were the group commander. Everyone knew that you were the wing commander, because it's just kind of like, how cool is that you're in an environment where there's probably low ranking enlisted and then senior ranking enlisted, and then of course officers that are looking at you for your every word for guidance and stuff like that. And to be able to be humble enough to say, fellas, I don't know the answers to these questions, and we're collectively going to figure it out. I just think that speaks volumes, and I think that the world needs more of that today.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yep.
And so who along great leaders, I used to watch General Rigian, who I think
Yeah,
also.
absolutely. Yeah.
I picked up my last TTP in group command from him too. He would literally pick the quietest person in the room on the side that was probably invited to the meeting to be there,
A plus
but
one.
was told not to speak. And he would call that individual out in almost every meeting that I was at and go, "Hey, do you have any input over there? Who are you?"
Yeah.
In smaller settings. And I picked that up from every group staff meeting I did as a group commander. I'd go, "Hey, who are you? What's your thoughts on this? You're here for a reason." And
Right.
it was amazing to always hear those individuals and what they were thinking. And quite frankly, they were probably the one that had the right answer in the room. They were just afraid to say it. So
Right.
it was pretty important to get that.
Awesome.
I would just for me, this stuff is so transcendent of the outside of the military, and I understand that's the world that you guys are in, but I just keep thinking of your stories and coming from coaching and business and just the way that could be used to empower those underneath you and to make them just feel great and to improve and to get better. I can't help but just say thank you for all of this great knowledge. I wanted to shift gears a little bit from, and I'll just preface this by saying that, Matt and I probably had a pretty good relationship for about three and a half years before I really kind of found out a lot of any of these. Matt doesn't necessarily love to talk or boast or whatever you want to say. But there was a picture I saw, and I think it's on our website now, and I would say that Ken would be in that picture. It's a much younger Ken, I believe, but of Matt and his team. And from what I kind of came to find out it was part of Operation Enduring Freedom and the kind of air support in that, and being kind of part of some pretty big moments in U.S. military history. And Ken, I don't know if there's just to maybe talk a little bit about that time and that place and maybe where you were at and your relationship with Matt at that time and how that maybe helped shape you.
Yeah, no problem. That picture was taken at the beginning of November in 2001 at the Fall of Mazar-i Sharif. So I know that day very well. But to kind of paint on like what was going on there, so I'm not going to make Smitty blush, although I'll try. I was a no talent lieutenant. I graduated mission qualification training on September 11th, 2001. My first combat mission ready flight was the flight from Oklahoma to meet Smitty over in Oman as we're flying missions in Afghanistan. The fact that he allowed me on his crew and allowed me to do what I needed to do and had the patience to not fire me the first mission. Our first mission, he put me on, I was basically like tertiary backup to the assist. I was one step above getting coffee. It was my job to copy down all the coordinates that came from the higher headquarters and pass them to the bombers. But the way it started was, Smitty was like, "Hey, all you have to do is copy down Dimpies from Kmart and pass them to the bombers." I'm like, "You got it, boss. I just got two questions: what's a Dimpy and who's Kmart?" And the fact I didn't get fired right there and sent on a plane home, and he took the time to teach me how to do the job and really build me into the battle manager that I became. My whole foundation of my career was set on that deployment, and I owe everything I have of who I am today to the leader that Smitty was, because he took the time to make sure that I didn't flail, I didn't fail, and that I was built up. But that deployment was amazing. And everyone on there, if you look at it, like Smitty at the time was a captain, and all of us were a bunch of lieutenants. And I'm not say had the world on our shoulders, but it was some pretty harrowing times out there doing what we needed to do for the nation and for security. But personally, that whole deployment set me on the trajectory that eventually brought me to where I am today.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but I do believe that they wrote a book and shot a movie about some of the stuff that happened around that picture. Is that fair to say?
They did, and there's whiskey
Yeah.
about stuff that happened on that thing today too.
Just for the folks that are listening and watching and whatnot, and Snooch, we'll get to a war story here with you shortly. So I just to put into context for the folks who don't know, when we first deployed to Afghanistan, there was only 5 jets, 5 crews, so it was a tall order. And just to highlight what Det said, it's not that we didn't want to let the wing down, we didn't want to let the group down, we didn't want to let the squadron down, we didn't want to let America down, and we didn't want to let the world down. And I think that was the pressure that you think that, maybe that's the same feeling you get when there's a championship game, or the same feeling you get when you're going into a ride at weapons school or whatever. And I think the more that we thought about it, Det, and Snooch, I know you had similar sentiments as well, the more that you kind of started trending towards probably not the direction you wanted to trend towards. But, again, for the listeners, how Det got there is there were some folks that had to be sent home. I did not send them home. They could not handle the pressure that Det talks about. And that's okay. That's not for everybody. And it doesn't mean they didn't have honorable service. It just meant that they couldn't handle that situation in time. And so they said, I think at the time that you were second lieutenant, right? I don't even think you were first lieutenant yet.
I just put it on. I just put first lieutenant on.
Yeah. Right. In September or October, or I can't remember. Or maybe August. I don't know.
August.
Either way, he was a brand new first lieutenant, and they said, "You want this guy?" And like, obviously, that's at the time where I couldn't look up the LinkedIn profile on Lieutenant Ken Voigt, or there, and even if I could have, there's no internet because they shut down all the comms and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, Ken Voigt sounds great. Like, I'll take him. And so up to that point, we're flying with a limited crew until you got there, and then you of course made us a full crew and whatnot. But again, Dad quickly graduated from that role to he was responsible for all the air-to-air refueling that took place at that point in time that we were on station. And again, I didn't know how to do it, but I knew that I knew that when I first met Dad that he had a very engineering sort of mindset to him, very detail oriented. Very much like, I maybe can't figure it out in the next 5 minutes, but if you give me 30, I can probably figure it out. And again, we weren't flying with every single human didn't have a laptop at that time. Every single person didn't have an open system architecture where they could interface with the console the way in which we can today. And a lot of it was just literally done by hand. And with bombers flying out of Diego Garcia, aircraft flying off the carriers and all that sort of stuff, there was a lot of machinations that needed to be done. And so I would argue that a lot of that success was due to, the Lieutenant Kaczynskis, the Lieutenant Voigts, the Lieutenant Mullins, and the Lieutenant Scotts of the world. And to think that a captain and like literally 4 lieutenants, were doing what we were doing. And I don't think that we were an anomaly. I think that level of experience then was probably very similar, to probably some of the sorties that are being generated today. I think was pretty friggin' heroic. And yeah. And, quite frankly, I know that you don't care and I don't care that whatever movie or whatever book we're not mentioning, we know the role that we played and the impact that we had. And you were a linchpin, to all of that. And if I yelled at you, I'm sorry. I didn't. And if I did yell at you, hopefully it had the right level of intent for you to get the job done.
I mean, you yell, but you can edit this part out, Cam, just so you know. When he gets really, really mad, just throw a Werther's original on his console, and then you'll hear him open the foil, put it in his mouth, and he's good for a solid 5 minutes.
And I'm happy. Yeah, very very akin to a toddler, probably. But yeah. So for the folks out there, when people are deployed, sending candy from the homeland is always a positive contribution to morale. So thank you. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And again, just for context, I don't even remember why it came up, but probably in a moment of defeat in our team, and Matt was helping and started to share a little bit about him. And I went home, watched the movie, and my head exploded and just was like, I just had never known that I'm hanging out with this dude and talking about things and talking about leadership and talking about how to connect with guys and how to manage this and do that. And then, he kind of got in and we've been able to parlay that story and experience and some of the things that we've been able to do professionally in the young stages of our business, and again connect with, I think, a younger generation, some of the people that you're talking about now because of the experience and the age and the experience level of that time. So thank you for for sharing that.
No problem.
Boss man, you got something you said you're going to share another war story with Jason here. I'm on the edge of my seat right now. So
yeah. Snooch, I don't know if, there's a lot of stuff that Captain Zemler did, but arguably there's a lot of stuff that you guys did, at Spang and Aviano as well. And I didn't know if there's, whether that it's a first person or from a third person perspective that you want to share. Because when I look back at some of the lessons identified, specifically as we were rewriting, 3-1.crc for the 17th time, some of the experiences that you guys had in Iraq were spicy, if you will, and not a very hospitable environment of which you guys operated in. But didn't know if there's anything that you kind of wanted to share, from your perspective, either, early in your career or perhaps even later in your career.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had the rousing stories that Dad has. I'll take it a different direction and talk about the stories of failure. And I will be I'll be a little truthful on that. So, the story that I would share is more of a learning point and humility for me from a leadership perspective. So I was a tinker baby, and for those out there that don't know what that means, when I was in my first assignment, while Det got there at a period that they were wrapping up, and during freedom and Iraqi freedom, the first time, and rolling through Baghdad in 2003, that was the exact time I was going through Tinker. So my 3 to 4 years at Tinker, I didn't get to deploy on the AWACS. I went to weapons school and was fortunate to go to a CRC, a Control and Reporting Center next, which is the equivalent to the AWACS, but just from the ground perspective. I went kicking and screaming first off, I thought I had an opportunity to say, no, I don't want to go there. And I learned quickly as a captain that you don't get the opportunity to say that. And off I went. So I showed up at Eglin and the unit was deployed. I quickly got my certification and met the unit downrange. And this is where I'll get to the story of kind of failure and humility. I thought I was ready and I learned as quick as I could. And I'll never forget, number one, the fear of deploying for the first time by yourself, because I didn't get to go with a group. I was just going to meet them in the middle of Iraq as a young kid, carrying, 2 guns on my hips and catching a C-130 to ride up there. And as I land, Bombshell, Turquette, Shix, met me. And she said, hey, we're glad to have you. We're shorthanded. We need you. Come on over to what's called an operations module. I said, sure, I'm ready. I'd just flown 37 hours without any sleep. Wasn't really comfortable. It was, Smitty, you'll appreciate this. It was a V3OM. I had learned on what was called a V5OM. So Cam, for the listeners out there, think Windows 99 versus Windows 2011. One was a touch screen and you had to look at it, and change things. And one actually had a mouse that you could point and clicking and stuff. So I didn't know what I was doing. They sat me down and they said, hey, we're shorthanded, control these aircraft. I said, I got it. So I sat down, and the first call that comes in, I'll never forget it. And for you guys, the old ones, they said, hey, Kingpin, this is Hammer 8-1, looking to go to this area, which is an area that, was a common area where Baghdad was, that was pretty congested. And I said, yeah, sure, head that way. And then all of a sudden, the next thing I hear is, Kingpin Hammer 8-1, we almost hit this guy, 50 feet below us. And I turn around and I go, hey, who's that guy? In a situation that I probably should have been more prepared for, or at least should have raised my hand and said, I'm not ready for this. I need a little bit more time in a real world situation in Baghdad area that I wish I would have kind of prepped myself a little bit more for. So I would tell all the young guys, like, you have to understand, not only everybody's itching to get in the fight, which is totally true. But at the same point, make sure you're ready to get into the fight. And then when you put into the fight, you're doing your team proud and not just trying to be somebody who's grabbing the ball and moving the ball down the field. Right. So many successful stories after that, I would say, or at least I'd say I'd hope. But, that the one that sticks out to me is my very first experience landing in Baghdad, Iraq, or Balad, Iraq, rushing to the OM, thinking I was going to be the savior to the theater. Yeah, I had a hatter and almost killed somebody within the first 5 minutes in the OM. So pretty humbling for me.
So probably a lesson there, Snooch, too. And again, not to say we're doing DFPs and all that sort of stuff, but it's probably, there's a little bit of probably speaking truth to power, right? Like if you're not ready to roll, then probably articulating that and just, having the moral courage to speak up and saying, you know what? Yeah, I probably, from a technical proficiency perspective, with a certain amount of rest, I probably could do what you're asking me to do, but I'm probably not ready to rock and roll. And again, that's a growth process, and it takes one is you're probably feeling inebriated, because I don't know what the math is, but I think flying for 16, 17, 18 hours is like the equivalent of like 2.5 or 3 beers. So you probably had like at least a 6-pack, or at least you felt like you had a 6-pack, and you probably weren't in the right state of mind to be thinking clearly in that situation. And you probably didn't exactly hydrate or eat all that well either. So yeah.
It's one of those things that stick out to you, right?
Yeah, totally.
We all like to, I think we
Right.
all like to talk about the great stories.
Yeah,
In my mind, the failures, it's true, the failures stick out to me more so than many
Totally.
other things.
I guess one of the takeaways, and I would value your opinion on this, but, again, Matt mentioned it earlier, fast life is, and how quick everybody wants to do this and move on to that. And you guys have shared different stories. But to me, a thread that kind of goes through this is the amount of time that takes for someone to develop a relationship with you, the amount of time it takes to grab someone, the amount of time it takes for that to sink in and really have value and help you grow as you go. And again, if I relate that to, I always call it the easy button, right? Everybody wants to press the easy button and I'm fixed. Everybody, hey, I'm ready for a promotion. Hey, I'm ready. I'm better. Put me in, whatever that is. And again, Matt and I, full transparency, we've built our whole business model around time, right? We're not a one-day workshop people. We're going to come in and get part of your organization and work with you. And so if you could just speak to the amount of time that, in order for whatever if you want to say it's about leadership, about mentorship, whether that was receiving or giving, and just the impotence of time and how important that is in that framework.
I'll go first. Sure. Cam, the time part is you need to devote the time if you are really expecting an individual to have a mentor-mentee relationship. And when I say you, I mean both. So what I found was important, at least important to me, was I would drop whatever I was doing in order to talk to somebody, because it was kind of a this will be an interesting answer. I think it was a more of a selfish thing. We think that you're doing that for that individual. In reality, I found a lot of great pride and personal satisfaction in just being able to sit down and talk to somebody who might need some direction and some guidance. So while I think the team around me would say it blew up the schedule many times, I would drop everything I was doing just to spend some time to talk to individuals. But I think to the point of like time, you have to develop and cultivate a relationship in order to effectively be a mentor or a mentee. I think the most common problem that I saw with younger individuals was they thought mentorship and menteeship was, I identified you as a mentor, you're my mentor, feed me. And that's just not the way it works. It works from a you take investment and stock into devoting and keeping your mentor abreast of what's going on in your life and asking questions. And the mentor takes, the time and the effort to understand what's going on in your life. And not only from a work or a sport or a physical perspective, but from a mental and a personal perspective as well. So I think it does take an incredible amount of time. I think I've been fortunate, not only from the mentoring other people, but from the mentee perspective. I've been fortunate that most of my mentors, and Smitty's one of them along the way, if I picked up the phone call and called them, even if they were extremely busy, they'd say, "Yep, I could call you back in 5 minutes at least." So I think that time is critical, and it's required in order to build an effective relationship over time if you really want to get something out of it. If you just want guidance or feedback, that's different than mentorship, I think. And a lot of people confuse the two. You could get guidance in a one-time, one-off deal, but true mentorship and menteeship, I think, requires quite a bit of time, is what I would say.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'd have to totally agree with Snooch. This doesn't ever happen, by the way, Cam, where Snooch and I agree all the time. So how you picked all the topics that we're very agreeable on.
Yeah.
But it's not about the amount of time. It's that when you're putting the time in, whether you're the mentor or the mentee, that you're present. I think every time, like when I look at the mentors I've had, it was never while they're typing on finishing their email or on the phone with someone else or even in a crowded office. Smitty used to take me for runs in Saudi Arabia, and that's where I got a lot of my mentorship. Is we were in a personal area where you can actually have the time and we were both present. And the other thing that I always found it was very beneficial to me is when my mentors took the time to not just worry about me, but realized that it's the whole person concept and brought my family in. It was right before I was going to weapons school. This person that ended up being my squadron commander after weapons school took me down and Doc Van's like, "Hey, what's your 5-year plan?" And man, I was nailing it, telling him exactly. I had alternate was ready to go. I knew exactly what I want to do for the next 5 years. And then he looked at this, "Hey, great. What's Sarah's 5-year plan?" A little rockier, like being able to go, I know exactly what my wife wants to do for the next 5 years. But I think that if we're going to look at individuals, you can't just look at what's the transactional relationship in this mentorship where the business gets the bonus. There has to be how do I develop you as an individual and how do I make sure that you understand your priorities and that when you know what your priorities are, that we have the discipline to go through a 5-10 year plan. And then, oh, by the way, I'm calling you in 3 years, even though we're in different ends of the world. I'm calling you to find out where are you on your 5-year plan? Are you on alternate course of action 5? Are you actually holding up your end of the bargain with your family? You said that in 5 years, the priority is going to switch to your spouse because your spouse wants to get a PhD. Did that happen? Those are the things that I think are very important when it comes to mentorship. And that only happens if you're present and you actually understand what both individuals in that relationship need.
That's amazing. And it's a little foreshadowing just for my last question. And if you guys could take the time and I think people, myself included, probably have an understanding, but maybe not an appreciation for the amount of moving, the amount of changing homes, schools, friends group, all of those things. And would love to just leave some time here for you guys to talk about the people that are most important in your life, which is your family. And if you could, give you guys the floor to do that as we close up here.
Yeah, Smitty, you opened up with asking a question about life balance too, right? And
Uh-huh.
the speed, and I think that they tie together. You know, how do you have a good balance in work, life, relationships, and then family? For me, I try not to use the terms life balance because that tends to think that I'm going to take away from column A to put in a column B and make sure my scales are equal, and that's not realistic to me. Actually, when I took the wing, and even when I took my group, I said we can't find balance. We just have to find harmony. We have to find a way where we understand where our priorities are, whether it be the professional priorities, the personal priorities, and then the family priorities. We understand what aspect of our life is taking that priority at this moment. So my squadron was getting ready to deploy to Balad. That probably should have been the absolute priority. But my squadron commander, it was Gator at the time, kicked me out. I was the squadron weapons officer, and I wasn't allowed to be there for a week because my daughter was getting born. It was my first daughter. She was born 6 days prior to our deployment. So the last week prior to leaving, I'm in the hospital and spending time trying to get to know my firstborn because that should have been the priority. That the priority is the family at that point. And as we grow, it's to me the most important part is understanding what's the priority and then communicating that, not holding back. Like we have to be able to communicate to our profession, like, hey, my family is priority for these reasons right now, or communicate to our family that hey, the job is priority for these reasons right now. It's very easy in the military to put mission first because the mission can never fail. But there's got to be that good communication on, hey, I have to spend time with my family right now. And then there's got to be between those two, profession and family, where you got to look and go, I have to spend time on me right now. I'm not okay. And I need to go spend some me priority. Might be a 10-minute walk. It might be I got to go for a drive. It might be I need to go walk, go read a book. But that communication and understanding the priorities really helps out, and it's helped my family out throughout the moves. My daughter, my oldest, she's in her third high school. She's going to graduate this year. So, high school's 4 years. She's been in three different high schools. And that's just due to the way we move around. I think she's on her 10th school in a 12-year session. So she's definitely felt the brunt of the military and where it needs to be. But there's a lot of communication with her on how we make sure that everything is where it needs to be. And I'll say the last bit is know the red lines and don't cross them. So my family has red lines on, hey, we can't move at certain points or don't put us in certain locations because it's not good for the family at that point. And I have to be able to communicate those red lines to the Air Force and then be very comfortable with if the Air Force says, I'm not going to hold the Air Force hostage. If the Air Force says, I need you to go to a location that you said is crossing your red line, well, then now it's time for probably us to part ways and it's time for me to retire because I know that red lines for my family and my family is a huge priority. To me, that communication back and forth is unbelievably key. My wife and I take walks every day where we talk about where are we, what are our goals, and how do we keep ourselves where yeah, it's a very busy lifestyle. Having a middle schooler, a high schooler, being a colonel in the Air Force, and Sarah's career. Yeah, it is a lot to take into account there. But as long as we're communicating and we understand the priorities, we're good. Now, I will say I was supposed to get out at 20 years. I apparently lied to everybody because I'm at 26 years. But every year after 20 was actually a discussion with the whole family, and that was kind of our contract. Is I can stay in because I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, but I can only stay in because the family has agreed that it's okay. We can take this next assignment because it's okay for us as a family. Prior to that 20-year point, I think I had the decision. Any decision after that, it's a family decision.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say on that is, the communication is key, and you get to a point where you have to make a decision, and this was the same conversation where I had a lot of conversations with other individuals. If you're not if you should want your family to be the thing that's going to be there once you've decided that your career is over and it's time to move on. And if you're deviating from achieving that goal, then maybe it's time for some serious conversations. I think there's a misnomer in exactly what Det was alluding to, and people thinking work-life balance equals 50-50. That is definitely not a thing. And one of my favorite mentors that I've had along the way was a wing commander at Aviano, and he used to say, hey, your work-life balance is kind of like a bank. So you're going to make deposits to that bank and you're going to make withdrawals to that bank. And if you're making more withdrawals from that bank than you are deposits, eventually you're going to go bankrupt and something's going to be gone. So it's okay to get down to a low balance, but you better have a plan to make a large deposit back into that bank so you can, and that might look like a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks of family time after you've had a real long push of something out there. But for me, the work-life balance thing, it is a struggle. I think anybody that tells you otherwise is probably hasn't looked themselves in the eye to understand really where they're going. And I think that's because, like most military members, sports members, athletes, leaders, they're very driven personalities who want to do the best they can at what they're doing at the time. And sometimes they tend to sideline the personal things in order to do that. At some point you have to look back at those personal things and realize, are you able to give back to that, to give some balance back to yourself? I think, I know Smitty's gone through this. I'm at the phase in my life where I'm hitting, retirement, and I've had 60 days of no work for the first time in not even 24 years. I'd say probably in 28 years, because, I worked all through college, and I sat there and I looked at myself and I said, well, after a week of me and my wife looking at each other, I realized I need a hobby. So, and still trying. So we sit there, and it's really important to keep that bank even and make those deposits and withdrawals, because at the end of the day, what matters most is what's going to be there. If you've done it right and you've done it well, you can look yourself in the mirror and you can look at your family around you and know that you've done it well. I think the other interesting part is we all too often think that the family wants you to be there more. I'll be the interesting part to no, I'm not saying that negative, debt. No smiles on that one. The interesting part to my kids is I've got 3 kids, and I would have thought that all 3 wanted me home more, and they absolutely do. But what I've noticed even in retirement is 2 of those realize they miss the Air Force lifestyle and they like doing some of those other things. So that communication part that I think Dad alluded to is pretty key, and making sure you talk to your family, and it's a joint decision, whether it's military, not military, whatever you're putting your time and effort into, everybody is on the same page of where that goes. But it's a tough discussion, and it's an even tougher decision when you reach the point that it's time to kind of focus on one versus the other.
Do you want to wrap it up there, boss man?
If you want to say a few words, then I'll just wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, guys, that was fantastic. Great perspective, and I think even more just like lessons learned, and I just wanted to thank you just for your time, your expertise, and your willingness to share so much over fabulous careers. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Cam.
Yeah, not to say that I expected anything less, but that exceeded expectations. So thank you, gentlemen, very much. And just 2 things I want to say is, one is, and I said it before, but the impact that you guys have had, on our Air Force has been exceptional. And I know, Det, you're still going, and Snooch, I don't know what the next piece looks like, for you, but, just in retirement, the level of mentorship that you guys can still provide can still be significant. And I think you guys can still find value from that. So, Snooch, if you give yourself something to look forward to, I think there's something there for you. And Det, I think that, there's definitely post-retirement, a post-Air Force career retirement, there's something there for you guys. But I also just want to give a shout out to your guys' families. I mean, Det, I love Sarah, and Snooch. I mean, Amy's just an absolute rock star. And I think they are what make you guys who you are and have for many, many years. And their level of patience, their level of just empathy that they possess, and the impact that they've had on Air Force families cannot be understated, whether that's the squadron level, the group level, the wing level, or whatever. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that on this podcast. And they're both tremendous human beings, and you guys have beautiful families, not just because of the fact that, you guys are who you are, but the spouses that you guys have, and just the impact that they've had on airmen and their families. I just wanted to recognize that and say thank you. So thank you, gentlemen, very much. The time spent with you is extremely value added, and look forward to hopefully having you guys on this podcast in the future, whether that's bearded or not bearded.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
man.